We're good now, Jason.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Okay. Good.
Ed, I think it's all you, my friend.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My job initially is to welcome. Now what happened? Gee, Merry Christmas. Are we still here? Okay. Welcome everyone to the Community Advisory Group meeting of August. What day is today? I wrote it down.
5th, August 5th.
August 5th. Thank you so very much. No, I wrote it down to make sure I didn't forget the day. And it was really interesting as we were getting ready to start the meeting. At first, there were just a few people on board, and all of a sudden, the screen just starts populating like mad. So I know that that's sort of symbolic of the kind of spirit that all of you will be bringing to this committee, that we will be populating it and working and making things explode in a very good way. So just like to welcome you all, and I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Johnell, who has some announcements to make. Johnell?
Great. Thank you, Ed, and good afternoon, everyone. Just our usual announcements here for a reminder for folks wanting closed captions in English and in Spanish. English closed captions are available within the Zoom and YouTube functions. Users can follow this link to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window. Again, that's https://ibr.news/captions. Next slide. And a reminder of accessing closed captions via Zoom. At the bottom middle of your screen, you should see a menu of options. If you can't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom middle of the screen, then click on the CC icon, and a separate window with captions will appear. Next slide, please. A reminder that we do have ASL interpretation. This is part of our program's equity commitment. In an effort to continue to center equity, there is an ASL interpreter in addition to closed captioning. To make sure the interpreter is always visible, please right-click their video and select Spotlight Video. For those watching on YouTube, when we screen share, you will be able to see the slideshow, closed captioning, and the ASL interpreter. You will still be able to hear different people speaking, but you may not see them. Next slide, please. And for webinar participation tips, again, thank you for joining us. Please join audio by either phone or computer, but not both. This reduces the level of feedback. We encourage panelists to turn on your video in an effort to be as present as we can. If folks would not mind having your video on. Please keep your audio on mute when not speaking. And if you experience technical difficulties, please contact program staff at 503-897-9219. Next slide. Reminder for our public input instructions. There will be an opportunity to provide brief public input later in the meeting today, roughly around 5:45 p.m. To dial in by phone, use the following directions. 1-669-900-6833. The meeting ID is 993-5459-6043, and the passcode is 674942. You'll want to remember to dial *9 to raise your hand. After you are invited to speak, dial *6 to unmute yourself. Next slide, please. For public comment via written form, fill out the comment form on the program website or email your comments to info@interstatebridge.org with CAG Public Comment in the subject line. You may also call 360-859-0494 for Washington or 503-897-9218 for Oregon, or you may call our 800 number at 1-888-503-6735 and state CAG Public Comment in your message. Written comments need to explicitly say CAG Public Comment in the subject line or in the body of the message for them to be identified and distributed to CAG members. All written comments must be received prior to 48 hours in advance of each upcoming meeting in order to be distributed to advisory group members. Comments received after that point will be distributed to members in advance of their next meeting. Next slide. And just a reminder for all of our CAG member participants, our operating norms is first to put relationships first, is to keep focus on our common goal. Our common goal is to figure out how we build the best crossing across the river. Notice the power dynamics in the room. If you're someone who oftentimes speak first, perhaps taking a step back and letting others speak. And if you're someone who perhaps don't always speak first, maybe push yourself and speak first. Create a space for multiple truths and norms. Be kind and brave. Practice examining racially biased systems and processes, and look for learning. Next slide. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair Washington.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to introduce the program administrator, Mr. Greg Johnson, who will give us a brief program update, and also I think he has an introduction of a staff member. Mr. Johnson.
Actually, Ed, we're gonna watch a quick video before we go to Greg. So
Okay. Sorry about that.
no problem. In keeping with our Bridge Stories series, we'd like to show you guys our newest video featuring our very own Sam Kim.
Thank you.
Cultural connection for me is a lifeline, and it is a way of getting great jobs. It's really a metropolis, and the bridge provides the link for all of us. My name is Sam Kim. I've been a resident of Clark County since 1990. And, you know, I'm working in Washington County in Hillsborough, and I have to commute there every day. I get up at 3:30 in the morning and try to arrive at work by 5:30, beating all the traffic. Even then, there's huge congestion. It is a long day for me. I have to decide whether I want to spend long hours at work or long hours staying stuck in traffic. So I hope this new bridge will really help us alleviate that by allowing alternatives such as electrical vehicle, which I have, and yet there's no advantage here because there is no special lane for electric vehicles. And so I hope that there will be other ways that we can move people across, because this is a vital work and cultural entertainment place that for visitors and citizens alike can go to. When the last Korean restaurant in Clark County closed a few years ago, for me to get Korean food, which I really need my kimchi, I have to go to Portland, Oregon, and there's numerous restaurants there. And having this bridge and the 205 alternative meant that I could culturally stay connected to my ethnic food. That's my comfort food. So I want this bridge to be safe. I want the bridge to be accommodating a variety of different kind of transportation, including mass transit, including light rail. But most of all, whatever will get the bridge built that will improve the situation we have today. Because right now, it is untenable, that it makes it very difficult for the tens of thousands of workers who live in Washington State but work in Oregon to continue doing that. It's insane.
Shocking.
Well, that was outstanding, Sam, and we want to thank you for your participation. And we'll be calling on others as part of the community advisory group to tell your bridge story. So thank you once again, Sam, and thank you, Ed and Johnell. So I want to quickly give you a brief update of what we've been doing with the program, the IBR program. So we are in the process, and our next speaker is going to dive in deeply to tell you about some of the important issues that we're going to be addressing over these next 6 to 9 months. But we've had great conversation with the Bi-State Ledge group. They are very interested in meeting with us on a monthly basis starting in September, because they want to be involved in understanding the processes and the modeling to get to the answers. But I'm telling folks we're getting down to what my mother used to call the nitty gritty. We're getting down to where the rubber meets the road with the decisions that we have to make in these upcoming months. So the community advisory group will be kept informed and will have chances to weigh in and ask questions and make suggestions as we are rolling through some of the data, as well as putting some of the models together. So we also are having small group meetings with our transit partners to have that conversation keyed up as to what type of high capacity transit will be the preferred model based on the data that we go through. So this is going to be a busy time, and once again, we want to make sure that the CAG is intimately involved in seeing these decisions and the modeling in real time. So another thing that we're going to ask going into the future this fall is to have some of our CAG members appear before our bi-state ledge group, so they can directly talk to you and ask you questions about your experience on the CAG, how your input is helping to shape the program. So this is going to be a very intense time period, culminating with, once again, the IBR solution towards the end of this year, early next year, and having taking it through all of our advisory groups and ultimately taking it to the bi-state ledge group in late March for their final say and their final approval of where we are taking this program. So once again, it's going to be an exciting time. It's going to be fast paced, but we are not going to miss any steps. We're going to listen well, and we're going to hear all of the comments. We're going to do more public outreach as we are going through this decision-making process. So we're not going to leave anybody behind, and every voice that wants to be heard on these issues will be heard. So it's going to be a interesting time. But for this group, we brought in one of our staff specialists, Alex Prentice, and she is going to walk you through how we are going to lay out the decisions, the timelines, design options, as well as screening criteria. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex for you to dive in. So thank you.
Hi, all. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I am Alex Prentice. I work on the program alongside of our really talented engineers and help them move everything forward in a way that everyone can understand. So like Greg said, we're going to be talking about some of the progress that has been made in terms of making key decisions, a little bit more about where we are right now, and then where we're going, and hopefully how we're going to get there. So next slide, please. So this may not look like a lot, these North Star targets, but it's taken us a couple of months to develop some of these primary goals that we have for the program. All of this progress is getting us to the IBR solution. We're keeping our team, and we're hoping you're going to keep these North Star targets in mind as we work through this process that Greg referred to of getting to the one IBR solution. So what that is our first target, our first North Star that we've fixed in the sky is one integrated program that includes a new river crossing over the Columbia River, high capacity transit, interchange improvements, and active transportation improvements. We're going to talk a little bit more about what each of those means in a few minutes. Our second North Star is to identify and advance a single IBR alternative with the goal of achieving a supplemental EIS. This means that we want to have one design, just like Greg said, to move forward through the environmental phase. This will be a package of all those components that we just talked about above, the river crossing, the transit, the interchange improvements, active transportation, and others. Our next North Star is that we are going to evaluate high capacity transit options. This doesn't mean that we have already decided on high capacity transit. It's the opposite. That means that we're not looking at just one mode. We are really carefully considering multiple high capacity transit modes. Another North Star target that we have determined is that we are going to replace the North Portland Harbor I-5 bridge. This is an important one. It was not part of previous planning efforts, but given the age of the bridge as it is, we have decided that it is in the best interest to replace it. Our biggest North Star, and this goes to schedule, is that we are going to begin construction no later than 2025. So how are we going to get there and where are we? Next slide, please. So we've seen this graphic a few times. We had our prior planning efforts, which took place between 2004 and 2014. We kicked off the IBR program in 2019, and we're now in the IBR program planning and environmental phase here in the middle of 2021. By early 2022, we would like to have one IBR solution that is then going to take us through the rest of the environmental phase so that we can complete the design between 2024 and 2025 and get us to our North Star target of construction in 2025. Next slide, please. So this is a chunky graphic of what we're doing now. And this really delves into the process of how we're getting there. It's not an easy process. We have to keep everything as objective as possible. There are a lot of key decisions that need to be made to get to the one IBR solution by early next year. So some of the key decisions we need to make that will get to the one IBR solution are associated with transit, roadway, and active transportation. We're going to look at a map in a second, but I want to just go over this process first. In each of these areas, we're going to objectively examine some different design options using the values that you've helped us develop to screen them and find the right IBR solution. This is going to be a process. So if you'll look, that takes us all the way to the end of December. It's going to require a lot of data that we're still collecting. It's going to require us to ask some really tough questions about what does and doesn't work best. It's going to require a lot of collaboration with our partners and with you, and we're hoping that those North Star targets are going to help us. The phase that we're in right now is this orange block in the middle of, or at the very beginning of June to August. We are working right now to identify these areas where we need to have some different design options and look at them, just like transit and high capacity transit, and come up with a really, really rough list of what some of those options might look like. At the same time, we are defining these screening criteria. These screening criteria go to these tough questions of, does this design option reduce congestion? Does this design option meet our equity goals, our equity framework? Does it further us towards our climate framework? And those are all going to be answered with the data that we're going to be collecting and that we've already started collecting, and that not all of it is done yet. So that is all in process. And that is, again, to try to get us to November time period when we're going to put everything together and we're going to actually be asking these tough questions. We're still just developing what these tough questions are. And in November and December, we're going to take our more refined list of design options, which we do not have yet, and we're going to take our screening criteria and we're going to work really, really hard to objectively look at things and then to come up with the one IBR solution. So if you note at the bottom, the timing of activities on the timeline will continue to be refined and are subject to change to align with technical work. So that remains true. We are going as quickly as we can. We want to get this done. We want to get our IBR solution in and finalized, but we also have to take the time that it takes. So I want to just go over really quickly with you, Jason, if you want to switch to the map, where some of these decisions are taking place. So I know this is hard to see. I wanted to put it in the PowerPoint, but it's ginormous. The transit options here, this is the first page. So these are some of the main transit decisions that need to be made to get to our IBR solution. We need to decide on mode. We need to decide on alignment. We need to decide on station locations, on the terminus points, on the park and ride locations and size, and on the off-site improvements that might need to be made. So this map shows a draft list of the design options of those areas that should be evaluated using the data and screening criteria. So how are we making the choices about design options so that we can get to an equitable, climate-friendly draft IBR solution? This is an iterative process that includes the partner feedback, screening criteria, data, and continuing to refine the design. And this is that process that's going to take us into January. So we're hoping that at each one of these locations that you see here, Jason, if you could just zoom into a random one, it doesn't matter which one. So at each of these locations, we are hoping to have made some of these key decisions so that we can package it all together for our one IBR solution. So replace North Portland Harbor Bridge, for example, has a check mark next to it, because as you know, that is one of our North Star targets. So that's been decided, but everything else you see here, the interchange options on Hayden Island, the number of lanes, the structure's alignment and configuration, local street connections, and roadway circulation routes, those are all going to be looked at. Those are all still being examined. And there might be a couple of options within each one of these decision categories. There might be more than a couple. We're still working on that, and we're going to be screening out, again, with the data and with the experts and with our partners and advisory groups. We're going to be starting to get to which ones of those decisions that we can make and that we can move forward into the single IBR solution. So I think Jason will probably send this PDF out to you later, but there are 3 different layers, and they just show the green is the roadway improvements, the yellow is the active transportation, and then the blue is the transit. And all of these are the key decisions that need to be made so that we can weave everything back together into one design. So that's about all that I have to present, and I welcome questions now. I think my colleague, Brad Phillips, who leads our design team and who is much more knowledgeable than I am as a non-engineer, can help answer some of the more technical questions. So Lynn, I'll turn it back to you.
So thank you, Alex. A lot of information, specifics. It also says exciting stuff ahead, so hang on, because here's where we get to weigh in on some of the important elements. I'm looking for hands. If you can go to the bottom of your screen, if you hover over the very bottom of your screen, you should get an option to raise your hand if you have a question for Alex. We're going to hear more presentations. Okay, so I see Martha, Tom Hickey, then Martha. And Sherry, did you take your hand down, up and down? Well, we'll defer for now. Tom Hickey, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
So can you hear me? Because I didn't get a chance to check
We
my audio.
can.
Okay, good. So I have been anxious to get my hands on the locally approved option drawings, and I'm assuming that the drawings that this particular presentation consists of, because we don't have a finalized design, but that I'm assuming that that is based on the work up to 2017 or whenever it was that the locally approved option was developed. So I
Tom, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I don't think I articulated that very well, but hopefully you understand my question.
Well, I think I understand. Are you asking for a map of the locally preferred alternative from the last time so that you can see where each one of those design options were chosen?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, that is what I'm anxious to get a hold of so that we can start to understand where we left off the process that we are expected to pick up going forward. And I think that this presentation that you have is a clue towards where that's headed. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, we can totally send you, I think it's public record. I just have to dig up that map and we can send that to you. I think this might be actually an overlay of the locally preferred alternative, the map that we just showed. So I'll confirm that, but I have a feeling that that's what that is. And then you'll be able to see what it was, which is what's there. And then those areas where we're looking at maybe some changes to improve it.
Great,
the answer is yes, that is where the program left off.
Thank you, Brad.
Greg, I saw you unmuted. Did you wish to comment or? No? Okay, Martha, your question?
Yeah, I saw the alignment on the map, the large map you showed, and the alignment sort of curves to the west for the bridge. And I just wanted to know if that alignment is fixed or if that's still something we're investigating as to where exactly it's going to go.
Brad, I am going to punt that right to you.
I think that was one of the notes that was on that graphic, if I recall. The answer is yes, we will be investigating other configurations and alignments for the bridge.
Okay, thank you. And then just a statement or a comment about that, the presentation, Alex, that you gave. You talk about a new river crossing. I would suggest that you change that to replacement river crossing, because a new river crossing in Clark County means something entirely different from, I mean, a new river crossing means a totally new location for a new crossing. So I would think that you might want to avoid controversy by replacing that word.
That's really helpful, Martha. Thank you. And we can definitely change that in our messaging, the new to the replacement.
Yeah, that's all.
Are there other questions for Alex and the team with regard to the information we just saw? And again, consistent with the information we saw in the beginning, I want to make sure that people feel like they can raise their hand and ask these questions. If you're not sure about something, it doesn't always have to be the same people asking questions. We want to make sure that we hear from everybody. If you have a question, you don't have to make one up to make me happy, but if you do have one, very much want to see it. I'm going to check my second screen, although it's supposed to jump in.
Yeah, I roped Brad in here just so that we could answer all of the tough questions. So don't make me, having begged him to come, have been in vain.
Well, I think you already pitched a couple tough ones to him, so maybe he will consider his time well spent. I'm taking.
Well, Brad, I have a question for you.
Yes.
So, Brad, I understand that one of the considerations we're looking at is a potential stacked option where one bound may sit on top of another crossing the river. So could you talk a little bit about that possibility?
Sure. When we use the terminology stacked, it's frankly sort of confusing because the previous defined LPA was also stacked. It had roadway on the top, it had the shared use path and transit on the bottom with two things on top of each other. It's also could be considered stacked. But from a pure, if you think about that one from a width perspective, it actually was two bridges, one carrying southbound traffic and transit underneath, and one carrying northbound traffic and the shared use path underneath. what Greg is referring to is an option that would put northbound and southbound on top of each other, and the transit and the shared use path in a version that's hanging or, off to the side. The benefit of that would be it's a bit narrower, and it's also would be on one structure. The complication of it is now we would have to get the stacked roadways back to side by side as they get on land on both sides of it. But the benefit is it's a narrower over the river, and might provide some flexibility for some of the transit and shared use path options as it gets off of the bridge and connects to land as well.
Thank you. And thank you. We've got a few more questions. Kevin, and then Julie, you had your hand up and you took it down. I'm not sure if you were wanting to ask a question, but if you do, you'd be after Kevin and then Tom. So Kevin.
Hey, Lynn, thank you. And it's good to see everybody. Excellent video, Sam. Appreciate that. And I don't know if this is a question now or later, Greg and team. I'm curious about the financing with relation to the new infrastructure proposed bill that's coming out and projected dollars that could be coming to Washington State and the programs that this program might be able to tap into. But again, not sure if it's germane now or for later in the dialogue.
No, it's a good question, Kevin. We've been having conversation with the congressional offices in both Washington and Oregon, and we were excited about the prospect of an infrastructure bill moving forward. So we have been making the case of why this bridge is unique, and the needs here are unique and supersede a number of other nationally highlighted projects across the country. So we've been having that conversation. We're going to see how it works out, but we are very excited about the potential of having IBR being identified or a category that would include IBR being identified in infrastructure, in the infrastructure bill. So yeah, it is. We have been having those conversations, and folks are on top of it in the congressional offices.
Thanks, Greg. Happy to support, sort of speaking on behalf of the 3 regional workforce boards of this project. I can say there's also other monies out right now that we're looking at from a workforce standpoint that may be, again, germane to these efforts through the Economic Development Administration and elsewhere. So it might make sense to maybe connect offline. Maybe Lisa or somebody can point me in the right direction of how we might best do that, because those applications are coming due within the next 8 to 12 months.
Excellent. We'd be more than happy to host that conversation and facilitate and not lose any opportunities to bring revenues to this program.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Terrific. Thank you, Kevin. Julie, then Tom. Julie, do you want to unmute? There you go.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. So this is just kind of a general comment or question, I guess. With this presentation and the other one, I guess I was just generally curious if the feedback you were looking for from CAG is just general reactions, or if there were specific areas that you were looking for feedback on.
So we're going to be asking some very specific questions. We're going to have community working groups that we're going to do a deep dive, and some CAG members are going to participate. I think there's been an ask of CAG members who want to participate in the community working groups. So some of those questions are going to be deep dives into the specifics of what an active transportation path will look like and what it will connect on both sides of the river, where we need to make better and safer connections. We're gonna be asking working groups and eventually the CAG to tell us what they think about having a interchange on Hayden Island, and whether there should be an interchange or should it be accessed off of Marine Drive. So questions like that are going to be very germane to putting forth the IBR solution. And so we're going to need input from the CAG members, as well as these working groups that are going to do the deep dive into some of these questions. So at any time you have a question on anything that we're doing, it's relevant. Please feel free to ask those questions at any time.
Thank you, Julie. Tom?
Great, thanks.
Yes, what is the working proposal for the height? Are the large tugs and the sailboats going to be able to go under it? And if so, how is that going to tie in with the railroad bridge?
So I'm gonna kick over to Brad to talk about the height requirements that still exist for us. So Brad, if you want to jump in.
Sure. Could be a frank question too. There was extensive waterborne use studies that were done previously, and we're updating those now to fully understand what vessels need to use the river. And along with that is what channels in the river they're using, so it lines up correctly with the railroad bridge opening. So we're currently in doing those studies right now. I'm not quite sure on the timing of when we're going to have that completed, but I think it's early next year. And that will determine the height. It was 116 feet of vertical clearance last time. And just as a place to start, that's what we're thinking now, but we really can't make that determination until we're done with the studies and work with the Coast Guard to come up with the conclusion. And that process does include quite a bit of the discussions with all of the users, so that we're getting all of their input, right? That's part of the process, is interviewing all the users of the river and finding those boats and talking to those owners.
One follow-up on that is, are you also working with the Bonneville authorities about the release? I live on the river, and at times our house will float 15 feet higher.
That is also all part of the work that we do with the federal government. That's a different process, different agencies, but absolutely. Is that the 408 permit? Yeah, the Corps of Engineers is the one we correlate with that.
Thank you. And then hopefully our last question, just in order, because we want to hear the Summit presentation. But Bill, thank you for joining us. Glad you could ask your question. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you very much. Hey, just a quick question, maybe Greg could just answer it. How are we interconnecting or working with the I-5 Rose Corridor project? Because it is all part of the same corridor. It all backs up over the bridge when you're going south, particularly in the evening, and it can back up going north north going in the evening, south in the morning, generally backing up. So it's got to be a consistent, a working together kind of a project, it would seem to me. Are we working that way? I haven't heard anything about that project with us, and maybe I missed it.
So we are working very closely with the Office of Urban Mobility. That the Rose Quarter project falls under. They are a part of Oregon Department of Transportation. So we talk to them on a regular basis about what's going on. As a matter of fact, we just met with some of their folks yesterday. So we understand the nature of what they're doing, and how that will impact the traffic that's being sent to us. So both the Rose Quarter as well as the projected congestion pricing on I-5 and I-205 have a large impact on traffic that's going to be coming our way, or traffic that's going to be heading downstream from us. So yeah, this is something that we are talking to them on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, my office is probably 15 steps away from Brendan Finn, who is heading up the Office of Urban Mobility.
Maybe at some point we could get someone from their office to come in and talk to us, give us an update of what they're doing too.
We can work on that.
Thank you. And thank you, Alex and team, for answering the questions, and Alex for giving us the presentation. Now, I want to reintroduce, we've heard from Sarah before, but Sarah Ogier, the Principal Climate Officer for the IBRG project. And Sarah, if you'll get us going, Jason's got the PowerPoint.
Right. Thank you, Lynn. And actually, I did just want to start with a thank you to all the CAG members. Just so appreciative of the time you contribute to our program through your participation on this advisory committee. Your perspectives and input are just so valuable. So I want to just recognize your contribution there. So if we've got the climate slides up, maybe we could go to the next one. As Alex mentioned, we're in the environmental and planning phase. And so in that phase and time period, we wanted to develop a climate framework that we could apply and weave in to our planning and then ultimately design. And as you saw in her calendar, would play out throughout the course of the program. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about our climate framework. And this icon on the right is a symbolic representation of that. We'll also, before I get to that, I'll tell you a little more about the climate context in which we're pursuing this work. We'll talk about engagement opportunities, some of the things we've heard in listening sessions, and some next steps on how we're sharing this out and updating it. We could go to the next slide. I do want to just acknowledge how important climate is. From a lot of time has passed since our prior planning efforts, and things have changed. And climate is now a leading issue and concern. It always has been for some, and it's all the more so important for many. And we see here just some examples of how recognizing that our local cities and agencies are making plans and recognizing climate as a critical component of their planning processes and things they need to consider. So when we went out and did community engagement, we heard clearly that the core purpose and need for the program continues, as well as an interest and a concern around climate and equity. So we've embraced climate and equity as core components of our program. We could go to the next slide. This slide is a summary of the current conditions, and I think of it really as our the problem statement. What we hope to change with our new program. It's around what needs improvement. And three key components here. We have a limited capacity for no emission travel modes. That's walking, rolling, and biking. And we want to change that. We have constrained transit options. Our connections and limited services. Sometimes the travel times deter users from choosing this low emission transit pathway. And we want to change that with this new design. We also see slow travel times and congestion, and that idling contributes to air pollution locally, as well as ultimately greenhouse gas emissions, and we want to change that. I was thinking, Sam, I just loved seeing your video and learning about your commuting experience, and those are the things we want to change. We want to create more options for people like Sam and all the others who want to commute across this bridge, whether that's transit, walking, rolling, biking, or making more efficient car passage. So that's our problem statement, and we want to do something about it. We can move to the next slide, please. I want to acknowledge that we're looking at climate, but not in isolation. As I mentioned earlier, we're committed to climate and equity being core components of this program. And so we'll be monitoring for where there's an interaction between climate and equity, making sure that our climate suggestions don't end up with disproportionate benefits or burdens. We want to be looking at climate burdens and benefits as they exist today, and consider some of that disproportionality as well. And embedded in this really are some of those notions around environmental justice or climate justice, and that will be an interest and a consideration as we move forward in this project in our planning environmental phase and then into design. So with all of that in mind, if we could move to the next slide, this arrives at really the IBR climate considerations, which is the foundation of our framework. And we have two main categories of climate considerations. And the first one is minimizing climate impacts, avoiding those impacts, and then also addressing climate resiliency. And that's looking at the future climate conditions and making sure anything we build infrastructure is prepared for that future condition. And we're going to be looking at both of these aspects throughout the course of the program. So that's in selecting transportation options and designing them, looking at our construction means and methods, as well as our long-term operations and maintenance. So that in a nutshell is the framework. And the next slide portrays it graphically. We could look at that. This is an image of, say, a flower, has multiple petals. The top two and the lower right one are talking about that minimizing climate impacts. And you'll see we're minimizing climate impacts for transport as we make transportation option choices. We want to minimize climate impacts as we look at our construction approach. We want to minimize climate impacts when we look at long-term operations and maintenance. The fourth petal in the lower left is representative of that climate resilience component that I mentioned. And that's really looking at environmental change and behavior change that we need to consider, and also design elements that we need to be considering as we look at future climate scenarios. The stem and leaf to the left say that this doesn't happen in a bubble. Again, we're looking at equity nexus throughout the process and considering that and choosing the best choices from an equity perspective as well. And then also this last piece is that petal says offsets. That's to recognize, well, I've talked about all the ways in which we want to minimize and reduce impacts. There may be at times some places where we aren't able to fully eliminate that impact, and we might be looking at offsets. So that in total then builds the framework under which we're going to be looking at our climate program and a climate framework for this program. The next series of slides takes us through each of those petals and gives you a little more example and detail about the types of things we'll be considering in order to achieve those objectives. So if we think about that first petal, which was minimizing climate impacts through our transportation options and choices that we design, here's some further detail on that. We really want to minimize IBR traffic vehicle-based emissions. And so we want to look at adjusting demand and using travel demand management tools, for example. Pricing strategies will be considered as well. But we really want to create infrastructure that supports communities with high access to opportunities. So that's a land use component too here. How can this infrastructure help shape land use patterns that create walkable communities and whole communities? And that can sometimes reduce some of that travel demand. We want to shift travel to demand to low greenhouse gas modes. We want to increase capacity and access to transit. We want to improve accessibility for bicycles and for people who walk and bike and roll across the program area. So we will see improvements in accessibility for those modes. We want to design infrastructure to accommodate high efficiency vehicles. Sam alluded to this as an interest of his, but that might mean looking at charging opportunities and maybe size and speed considerations as we imagine the future fleet 50 years from now, and what will our bridge and highways demand. We want to improve transportation efficiency. That means reducing congestion, designing for traffic smoothing, targeting moderate speeds for lower emissions. This has air quality benefit, but also has cumulative greenhouse gas benefits as well. And of course, we'll want to be using smart systems, smart technology. We'll be looking at this intelligent transportation system, ITS tool, which is used in state-of-the-art transportation systems across our region. We could move to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about construction, minimizing climate impacts during our construction process. So we will be looking at low E, and I use that as an abbreviation for low emissions, low energy demand, construction methods and materials. So that you've heard a lot of talk about cement or steel as having a high carbon footprint, we'll be evaluating alternatives that could get us to a lower carbon footprint. For example, we'll be looking at low emission and low energy construction equipment and vehicles. We'll also be exploring how we can use local manufacturers and source material locally and reduce transport. That helps with reducing emissions. We're exploring, and I would promote this zero waste goal for demolition, taking all economically viable resource materials that are coming out of a demolition and repurposing them. And that way avoiding waste and reproduction of new materials. Those are some of the examples of the construction considerations we'll be giving. We can move to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about maintenance and operations. We want to minimize emissions associated with ongoing maintenance and operation of these facilities. So that will mean looking at life cycle cost analysis for materials and design selections. It may mean prioritizing materials that have higher durability, so you can reduce those maintenance intervals and limit the resource demand consequently. We'll be looking at renewable power supply. We'll be looking at high efficiency lighting as a standard for the system. We'll also be looking at electric vehicle maintenance fleets and then maintenance and operation and for the ongoing operations of these facilities. Those are some examples. So if we could move to the next, this fourth item reflects that offset notion, which that we may be looking at offsetting unavoidable emissions. In some cases, there will be emissions. And so what are appropriate offset programs we could look at for this program? We might be looking at offsets for construction or perhaps for ongoing operations. We want to create a robust landscaping plan and sequester carbon consequently through vital plantings, maybe perhaps a higher level than you would see in traditional tree and planting placement in the public right of way. These are just some of the examples of how we might be looking offset program. I want to pause for a second and say, I'm telling you all these things we're going to consider, but we're going around to our advisory committees, just like you and the public, and getting more input about what else we should be looking for and adding to this framework. We could move to the next slide. I'm going to shift now to those previous slides talked about how we want to minimize and reduce climate impacts from this work. But in addition, we need to acknowledge that we've seen climate variability and climate change in certain environments. So how can we design to be climate resilient? So we need to be considering environmental conditions resulting from an evolving climate, an uncertain climate in our future. We may see increased storm intensities that might result in how we manage stormwater. We might see increased river water elevation. A previous member talked about river management. We might also see lower river levels if we have higher demand upriver. So we'll be connecting with BPA and others to see what their forecasts are for river management, making sure we consider those river elevations in our design. We'll be looking at increased weather extremes. That might be, high heat or other things, and what that would mean for road surfaces or bridge expansion. That all has to be considered. I talked about planting. Well, plant survival is really important as we have changing climate. So we'll be very selective in picking the right plants so that they can be resilient in this changing future climate condition as well. This next slide talks about how climate change or evolution or uncertain climate might result in behavioral changes and things that we should be considering as we plan for a long-term future transportation infrastructure. So that might include things such as pondering climate refugees, a possible influx of residents. What might that do to our growth centers, and how would that affect traffic patterns? Could we see a shift from areas of increased flooding? Or, as we've seen this summer, and we've seen the last several summers, how does increased wildfire and smoke impact our region? Is there a transportation pattern that's evolving as a result of that? We might see changing work patterns, a shift to early or later cooler work hours and telecommuting. All these things could feed into a change in transportation habits, including I mentioned here for shipping and transportation of seasonal workers that could change a transportation pattern, and then shipping could be impacted by transport of seasonal products, whether that's on the road or on the river. We want to be mindful of those things. Again, we welcome input and hear from others about how you're integrating and reflecting on these potential changes so that we can bring that into our planning process as well. So that is the climate framework, the types of considerations we want to present and weave into our design process, our planning and design process, that is. The next couple of slides show you so sketches of a graphic illustration of what we've heard as we've gone out and talked to others about what they are thinking in regards to climate, what's important to them, and how they see it being relevant to the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. This graphic portrays a meeting we had with our partner agencies, local ports, cities, transit authorities, and asked them what they were hoping for in the bridge. And you can see several items here, electric cars, they want transit, they want improved mobility, access and equity is a concern. They want to look at new ways to have low GHG transport of freight, looking beyond electrification potentially. On the lower left, you see that traffic light signal. That's the ITS, the Intelligent Transportation Systems. People are asking for that as well. And in the lower right, you see that resilient and walkable neighborhoods. These are themes that we're hearing from our partners and the public. And I love this one in the upper right, the greenest bridge in the US. Clearly, our partners in the community have aspirations that this bridge can be a beacon of success from respect for the environment and climate and considerations. We could look at the next slide. This one captures what we heard when we had a listening session with the public regarding sustainability and climate, and captures some of their interests. And you'll see a lot of overlap with what we heard from the partner agencies as well. Interested charging areas for vehicles, keeping workers safe, that's really important as well. Improving bicycle pedestrian access in the lower right. And they have this little flag, we lead. There's an expectation that this bridge leads and is on the cutting edge of being one of the best examples of how we can integrate and reduce climate impacts as we build essential infrastructure. So these materials will be available online. I think these are posted already, but it's fun to see what we're hearing from the public and our partners about what they hope to achieve with this project. And I wanted to pause for a moment and say, I've told you the framework, I've told you what we're hearing from people. Greg wanted to say a few words about how this applies throughout. I've been thinking recently about it's like the thread that we're weaving throughout the program. Greg, would you like to say a few words about how we're applying this climate framework throughout the program?
Yeah, so it's important that we just aren't saying words, that we are actually putting outcomes and actions into place that will achieve the goals that Sarah spoke of. So a lot of these things are going to be reflected in the screening criteria for design options. The designs that we put forward are going to address a number of these issues. So we also are talking about performance measures, and performance measures are what we hold ourselves accountable to. It's the report card of how we are doing with the things that we promised. And those promises will get wrapped into several different potential documents. So we're talking about intergovernmental agreements between the DOTs and the partner agencies. We're also talking about the potential of a community benefits agreement that will also speak to climate and equity issues. So once again, these the analysis that needs to be done and that will be done will hopefully lead to a greener bridge, but also mitigation things that we can do. And Sarah mentioned the planting of native plants and planting of trees to offset any greenhouse gas emissions that are being emitted as part of this program. But once again, we also recognize that we are a 5-mile long program, and we know that we are part of a community, part of a region that will be addressing these problems. That's why we are talking to to numerous agencies about what their plans are, what they're doing, so we can do complementary things and smart things that will be a force multiplier to make this once again a green bridge, a green corridor for the region. So Sarah, I'll flip it back to you.
Yeah, I love that idea of a force multiplier. And that's really how I think of when we talk to our partner agencies, if they have climate plans and actions they've identified, how can we work together to achieve that, bigger regional desire for a healthy environment, healthy climate. If we could move to my final slide, I just wanted to share with folks how a couple milestones just coming up and our engagement and sharing this information, things we're doing in the near term. This summer, during the June and August period, we've been sharing this framework with partners, getting feedback, developing the components. And today I get to be here with you and share it. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you'd like to see in this framework or what your impression is of what we've shared so far. And then we'll be working on nexus with equity, hopefully going to the equity advisory group in the near future. We don't have a date set for that, but that's coming up. And then through the end of the year, we're going to be working with the design team and our partners to finalize this framework and integrate it fully into the screening criteria as we look at design options and make choices to move towards that one IBR solution. And then ultimately, we're going to have performance measures, as Greg alluded to, that talk about what we hope to achieve as regards to climate and sustainability. So that we can move the final slide, is just a question slide. Again, Lynn, I'd love to hear from your colleagues, your members, about what you think of this framework and if there's other pieces you'd like to see added or consider.
I'm going to insert something. Jason, sorry to put you on the spot, but can you throw the slide that's the IBR climate framework up? Because part of what we just saw we're being asked is, our feedback. So in addition to questions, if you have feedback on that, but I want slide 22. Can you go backwards?
Backwards.
It's the diagram. Go backwards to slide 22. Yeah, so there you go. So this is the IBR climate framework. And so in addition to questions you may have about this, comments about this or any other element are welcome. So thanks, if you can pull that down so I can see everybody. I'm looking to see if anybody, okay, I'm gonna call on Rondali first just because she hasn't asked a question, and then we'll go with Julie and Tom. So Rondali, sorry. Rondali?
Oh, thank you for remembering. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
So I really appreciate all the information you shared and the focus on the environment as well as equity. I'm wondering if in part of this framework, if there's gonna be a way to grade the different construction companies that bid on the project, to make sure that they themselves make it a practice to be environmentally conscious and also equitable. And I saw that there's a component of keeping workers safe. That's always, I think, a target for construction. But I'm wondering if there's other values that you're looking for, like how they're treated, the benefits, the break times they get, whether they shut down during, a heat wave or those kinds of considerations.
Well, Lynn, would you like me to respond? Yeah.
Yeah, let me be very clear. I'm responding to nothing. I'm calling on people and then looking for other people to respond. So yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Well, there definitely are ways to put performance expectations in your bid materials so contractors know what your expectations are. Say for waste management, recycling materials and when you're for demolition, or we have a whole number of desired performance conditions that would be supportive of our climate and sustainability interests. But also, I just want to mention that inclusivity and is a real important part too. And Greg, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about Andre's work here.
Yeah, there's we're looking to have a diverse set of contractors who will be doing work on this program. We will probably have more than 15 different contracts to achieve all of the work that's out there. But one of the things, and I've worked in on the construction side of things most of my career, construction is always consists of carrots and sticks. So you put carrots out there to incentivize folks to behave appropriately, but you also put in some sticks to whack somebody upside the head when they go wrong and differently from what you want them to do. Now, I'm a strong believer in carrots get better compliance. So we will be writing incentives for exactly the type of things that you were mentioning, Rondale, to make sure that we have contractors that are respectful of their workforce, that are respectful of the environment. So we'll have the right incentives in there to drive the behavior.
Thank you. Julie, then Tom.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. That was really a nice one. So Oregon and Washington both have some pretty aggressive clean energy targets coming up and in the next, 10, 15 years. And I guess my question is, I don't know at what point you guys would start looking at kind of ways to incentivize kind of like electrification of the transportation sector, kind of consistent with some of those state goals. I imagine things like if there's like a toll or something for, for non-electric vehicles or something, that could bump into some equity issues, but maybe there's something like an exception for, people who are low income or something, I don't know. There's a lot of options there. One of the comments from that we reviewed for today talked about maybe a special lane for electric vehicles, things like that. It seems like there's a lot of ideas out there, and I was just wondering, are you guys thinking through those now, or at what stage in the process would you guys be considering some things like that to incentivize electric vehicles?
So Sarah, you want to jump in on that?
Sure. I think I'm leading with assume we're going to have more electric vehicles, and we have to design for that and support and make that that vehicle choice work and be successful on the infrastructure we're designing. I think there's a number of other entities beyond just a single bridge or stretch of road that are doing a lot to incentivize electric vehicles. And I think you talked about some other controls that might be in place to encourage one or the other type of driver. And I'm going to defer to Greg on that.
So one of the things, and you mentioned it in your comments, is the equity piece. So generally, it's the poorer folks hold on to vehicles longer or have vehicles that are older and would not qualify to be in that electric lane. So we have to make considerations that we are not creating Lexus lanes for the uber rich who can afford a Tesla or other electric or hybrid cars. But there are models out there that are trying to address the equity in those scenarios. So we will be looking at those and talking about how they can apply here. But the one thing I want to make sure folks recognize, we're a 5-mile corridor. So getting people into a lane for a 5-mile trip, it may be worth the benefit. And then again, it may not. So we're going to have to look at all of those issues and see what's the most equitable, but what is the most effective way of incentivizing different behaviors. We're trying to, by creating high capacity transit as well as active transportation facilities, to create facilities that folks will be comfortable with, and they can do it in such a way that it's efficient for them to travel in a lesser greenhouse gas producing mode. So those are things that we think are critically important to the success of this program. But we will be looking and investigating a number of different issues as we start getting down to the design of what this thing looks like.
And I just want to chime in to Greg, you know, one of my earlier slides, I said, we want to be looking at the equity nexus. This is a great example.
Yeah.
You know, from a pure GHG perspective, I might think one thing about, you know, prioritizing electric vehicles at all costs, but we really need to be considering in a bigger equity context and accessibility. So we'll be evaluating that. Thank you.
Thank you. We're running short on time. I have a question for Tom and Martha. Maybe you can just shake your head or nod your head, but we have a couple of people who've raised their hand who haven't had a chance to ask a question or make a comment. Would it be okay if I called on them first, or you were first in line? So, okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask for Andrew and then Sarah. So Andrew, if you want to unmute and
yeah, absolutely. And I'll keep it very quick, but I really appreciate the presentation and the thoroughness of it. And you'd mentioned in the piece around sort of existing conditions, I think was just a knowledge base around the changing patterns of commuters as a result of telecommuting, and obviously the results of the sort of pandemic and how it's shifting the use of work and how people might be experiencing work and making decisions about their commercial real estate interests as employers, for example. Can you maybe provide to me and the rest of us how you will be approaching the analysis of what is clearly a sort of a shifting experience of how workers and employers are relating because of the results of the pandemic?
Wow, Andrew, that's awesome. I can talk about how it's changing my life, but I don't really think that's a exclusive climate question. And so I think I ought to defer to Greg and just acknowledge that we have a whole team of transportation modeling experts who are they're working closely with our transportation partners and agencies in the area to determine what the transportation patterns are and to model that. But Greg, if you want to chime in and add anything in addition about how we're integrating or looking at contemporary conditions.
Yeah, this is a question that's being looked at nationally about what did the pandemic do to the traffic is generally pretty elastic, meaning that something will happen but folks will go back to that mode, and we're seeing some of that elasticity in the number of vehicles that are using the bridge. It did go down during the height of the pandemic, but we are seeing indications of increasing numbers. So we have to be very careful. We want to look at some of the national work that's being done around commuting and working from home and what that's going to mean for travel across the bridge. So it's something that we're looking at, and if it changes what our projections are for traffic to going across this bridge in the future, it will get factored into the number of lanes and how we look at the capacity that's provided going into the future.
And I'll just say from a climate perspective, I'm going to be encouraging the team to be thinking long-term, right? Today we're experiencing one thing, but we're designing infrastructure for 50 plus years. So we need to be contemplating the whole range of experiences that this infrastructure might experience over time.
thank you. And then Sarah, did you want to quickly ask a question?
Sure. My question is regarding not regarding, but you mentioned planting native trees and plants and such. Is there going to be a large amount of green space planned, or are we just talking plantings on the side of the road? Any sort of parks or any public space at all?
So I think there's an opportunity for both. And as we mentioned, we're in the early stages of environment and planning work. So Greg, do you want to add more about that?
Yeah, there can be interchanges are great opportunities for plantings, but also we can take off-site locations, purchase those to increase our planting footprint. So those are things that I think are important to the community. So if we can achieve our goals by just the physical right-of-way in this 5-mile corridor, we have other means of obtaining properties where we can do plantings for the mitigation and offset of greenhouse gas production.
I have a vision that if we do some of that offsite work, that we're working closely with our communities to identify sites that resonate and are, make a good relationship between our project site area. So interested to hear input on that as well from community members and others.
So this is a time when I want to poll everybody. I'm going to have to shift screens, but we still have a presentation. We have 2 people who still have more questions. We have a presentation on the equity framework, and we get to hear from Greg more specifics on the project. We have a question time period after each of those. I'm wondering if the group wants to proceed to presentations and then just ask all of our questions, and Tom and Martha, you can be first in line, or if you'd rather just keep going questions, but it means we're not going to get to the presentations that we had hoped to cover. So if you want to kind of move forward, maybe show an arrow, and if you want to kind of stay where we're at, you can just show level, because you want to stay where we're at. Tom and Martha both want to stay where, so you guys want to stay and ask questions, not move to presentations. Got some arrows. Most people aren't voting. I've only got 3 or 4 arrows. It's not compelling. A few more arrows.
And Lynn, to make this more difficult for you, I am happy to come back at our next meeting and deliver the equity framework, because my hunch is there'll be additional questions on that as well.
Okay, well, I think none of us want to rush, but I also want to make sure that we honor people's commitments. So thank you, Johnell. That is an easy out. So Tom and then Martha, and then we'll move forward depending on what time permits. So Tom, go ahead, please.
First, I want to thank you for allowing us to continue. This is so important. And Sarah, this is the first time I've seen all of this put together like this. It's outstanding, but it also brings up a lot of things. And I hope I'm not the lone voice in the wilderness here. As far as electric cars, Greg, you mentioned that. Volkswagen and General Motors have both said they will transition to totally electric cars. Volkswagen by 2030. So that says at some point it's going to be to where everybody can have one. And this bridge, we talked about it being a 100-year bridge. So I'm glad to see that we're going to keep that in. I wanted to ask you about some things that I think are missing though. And in the equity, we're talking about, yes, local contractors and all, but initially we were talking about working with the trades and the community colleges and the housing vulnerable to get trades and training in this. Since this project is going to be so huge and just be the best opportunity for improving the lives of a lot of people. And I hope that hasn't been just superseded by let's go local. I think there's a lot more here, and I hope we're working with the education and the trades in the development of that. The other 2 things that the other thing I want to bring up that looks like it dropped off is the salmonid. Right now, there's a proposal before Congress to have 4 bridges on the Snake River, 4 dams on the Snake River removed. The Columbia River is the largest migration of salmon and salmonid and steelhead in the 48 states. Our construction, taking this bridge down and building a new one, I cannot imagine it's not going to affect this since there are 4 migration periods for these each year. And that wasn't mentioned this time, but there was one drawing one time that had fish on there, but nothing's there now. And I hope that others will support that we have to do something to not eliminate the salmon in through the migration, since they are a threatened species. So if you could speak to those 2 issues, the equity trades, training, opportunity, and the salmon. Also, I would mention that when we're talking materials, I hope, Greg, we're still considering concrete that encompasses the carbon monoxide.
Thank you, Tom. Just great comments. And they are indeed things that our program cares about. I want to remind your members and viewers that tonight my presentation was really on our climate priorities. And it is not inclusive of all the other great things we're doing in the environmental realm. And salmon considerations are front and center in those considerations as you look at the Columbia River, such an iconic river, so many important runs, absolutely going to be considered, and avoid impacts there. That'll be part of our environmental review process. And I don't think, I wouldn't take my slide as being the full statement of our contracting approach. Is just an example of some things we're looking at from a climate perspective. There are many other factors that need to be considered, and I believe the ones you mentioned are still all up for discussion. Greg, you can weigh in here and affirm.
Yeah, Sarah, you're absolutely correct. We know that there is going to be numerous contracts. We're looking at making sure we have equitable situations for small businesses, for minority and women-owned businesses to be a part of this program. But we recognize the expertise that it's going to take to build some of the work here. This will attract national firms. And so this is going to be a mix of that. But we know that, once again, we're going to have a workforce plan that will have apprenticeships to help accomplish the work. So this is, because it was not mentioned doesn't mean we're not thinking about it. And as we get into labor agreements and things of that nature, you will start seeing those conversations come up in this forum. But once again, we've got to get to the IBR solution and get that moved forward before we can start diving down to that next level of activities.
Thank you. Martha, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I actually had 2, but I think that Johnell is going to address one when he talks about equity either this time or next time. And that is, you talked about changing behavior using, one of the measures was using congestion pricing as a demand management. And I think from an equity standpoint, the analysis of that needs to be really robust, because I see that as a major equity problem, because lower income people don't have the flexibility that higher income people do to change their work hours and change their locations. And I think that's a real problem. And you don't have to address it now. I just wanted to make sure you guys are really thinking about that, because I think that's going to be a big stumbling point.
Thank you, Martha. And I do know at the executive steering group, that topic received a lot of attention. And so I'm confident the program is kind of taking a deep dive and looking at multiple options. But to your point, it can be addressed by someone more knowledgeable in a little bit.
Okay. And then my second question is for Sarah, and it has to do, you were talking about eliminating waste. Your slide showed that you want 0 waste from the demolition. And I find that to be a bit of a mind boggler. Could you address that a little bit, what your thinking is on that?
Sure. And Martha, I'd be happy to talk with you more on the side, since I know we're rushed for time. But the point is, any materials that have remaining economic value that you can do resource recovery with, that you strive to repurpose those. And I've seen it done on large capital projects pretty effectively. So happy to talk with people more about that.
Thank you. And we're not exactly rushed for time because we just, doubled our, anyway. So with the will of the CAG, we're continuing on. And Galina, you have a question, please.
Not so much a question, more a comment, just to kind of respond to what Tom said. Tom, my name is Galina. I'm with Clark College. I'm fairly new there, but I wanted to expand on what you said by saying that, at Clark College, we're very much interested in how we could be a part of this conversation, including how we engage our students, our faculty, our staff. This is such an important project, for personal reasons, such an important, dream for our community. So please keep us in mind. No question, just a comment.
So if I could follow up real quick on that. So this year, we brought on 12 interns to the IBR program, 12 students ranging from high school juniors to seniors in college. And we're going to be looking to expand that as the program goes on. We are very much interested in partnering, bringing different projects to the area colleges, senior programs that students can work on who have an interest in whether it's the engineering aspect, the environmental aspect. So we would love to partner with that mindset to bring more folks in to gain experience and gain benefit from this program.
Thank you, Greg. And I know that WSU Vancouver would also be interested in partnering. They have senior projects in their engineering college that would be, I think, a great match. So thank you. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's commenting and listening and asking questions. It absolutely matters. We are, by group consensus, and Johnell's volunteering, equity is just too important for us to try to race through. So we're going to take the equity presentation that we had planned on hearing today and defer that to our next meeting. At this point, I'd like to invite Greg to kind of lead off with some comments and then have open it up for discussion. And so be thinking if you have additional questions, particularly those of you who haven't commented or given feedback. It's important that we all have equal voices or equitable voices. And so if you haven't used yours yet, please give some thought to that. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Greg for the next section. Greg?
Greg, if Lynn, we did have one more hand up. Whitney, you haven't had a chance to ask a question. I do see your hand up. So I just, right before, Whitney, do you have a question for us?
I do, thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you, Sarah, for your wonderful presentation, and for Tom for bringing up the issue with the salmon. For some of you guys who know me, I am a Cowlitz Indian. I'm enrolled in the tribe, and I am also on a few of our boards and our tribal council. And so I was thinking about that very same thing, Tom. How are we going to make sure that we are considering our swimmers, our flyers, and our walkers along the river and along this process and the demolition piece? So I didn't have much of a question, but I look forward to getting to a space where we are having these conversations and creating a plan and plan to mitigate any issues that are not only in this area, but also that go up and down the river. So I just want to say that I'm thankful that we're having these discussions. I look forward to working more with with our natural resources and our cultural resources departments at the tribal level, and also with the bridge replacement team. So thank you.
So if I could comment real quick, we've been having conversation with the tribal governments in the region, and their most important issue back to us has been the natural resources that that exist in the Columbia River, and the protection of the Columbia River as we are going forward with this project. So this is an iconic river. We're going to have scrutiny on numerous things, whether it's wildlife, the turbidity that's created in construction. So we're going to be looking at the cutting edge things that will make our construction in the river the least impactful that we can have. So there's things like turbidity curtains, there's bubble curtains. We won't be allowed in the river to do work in the river during certain time periods in respect of the salmon and other species that that populate this area. So we're thinking about it. We're going to have an extremely critical permitting process that we have to go through to demonstrate to not only the tribal governments, but to the permitting agencies that we are doing the right things and smart things as we construct this program.
Okay, Greg, I think it's all you, so take it away.
So if any of you follow our Facebook page or our Twitter for IBR, you see we get a lot of side comments about, oh my God, there are better solutions out there than what you guys are thinking about. And so I wanted to take some time to let the CAG know that, you know, we hear these comments and we look into these comments. And so I want to share with you some of the things that we've been doing to make sure that, you know, these other ideas had a fair hearing and that they don't meet purpose and need for this program. So we spent a lot of time chatting with folks about the immersed tube tunnel idea. And on our website, you will find a presentation that we made to several folks regarding this. It's fantastic technology, but it just does not fit given the set of circumstances we have. With the BNSF rail line to the north, with having to come back up to grade on Hayden Island to access the island. There are just numerous things to connect SR 14 back, which is a critical entry into downtown Vancouver. All of these things were looked at and grades were looked at to see, okay, is this feasible to do? So we looked at it and it does not meet what the purpose and need of this project is. And part of the purpose and need is to keep the connections to other facilities in the area. So secondly, we've heard about the common sense alternative. And once again, it's an idea that has merit. There's a lot of smart things in it. But once again, when you talk about retrofitting the existing rail bridge that crosses the Columbia further to the west, that is not a bridge that is owned by the DOT. That is owned by the railroad companies. And for us to take that bridge and say we're going to now retrofit and put in a lift span, then we're going to build two other bridges to cross the Columbia, I tell folks, hell, we're having a hell of a time trying to get one bridge built. So now you're talking about doing all of this other work in the river, and you still have not solved the essential problems of I-5. Unless you're going to relocate the I-5 corridor, which I hear nobody saying, the common sense alternative involves building new roadways, creating more disruption to the region. And this is not that program. This is to look at the I-5 corridor and say, how can we make this corridor function better? And finally, probably the most vehement contributors to our Facebook page and other venues are the folks who are advocating for a third bridge. And once again, there's a lot of merit to that discussion. Having a number of lanes going across the Columbia River in the Portland, Vancouver metropolitan area is a future concern. But once again, it does not address the problems that exist in the I-5 corridor. Once again, building a third bridge is not going to attract enough traffic away from I-5 to make it feasible where I-5 problems are going to go away. You still have a 104-year-old bridge that exists. You still have 140,000 people every day who are trying to cross this location. So we have looked into these issues. We've put information out on our website that I hope people take some time to look at and understand. We are not ignoring these comments. We are looking at them seriously, and we are responding in a serious manner to these issues. So I just wanted to let the CAG know that we are not ignoring these other alternatives that are being put up as better than the IBR solution or the future IBR solution. So with that, I would take any questions or concerns that that anyone has regarding these other alternative plans to cross the Columbia River.
Thank you, Greg. Irina, you have your hand up?
I have the question about 140,000 that Greg just mentioned, trying to cross the bridge. Is it daily, and how did you arrive at this number?
Yes, that is a daily count, and that is my understanding. That is the latest updated numbers that we have from our traffic counters in the area. So prior to the pandemic, we were right around 139,000 vehicles per day crossing the Columbia River on I-5.
Tom, you have a question?
Yes, I wondered when we're talking those numbers, Greg, was the Vancouver City Council, was Hanson just completely out to lunch there? No, I can't say that. I'm sorry. Were those numbers that were presented then, did they seem realistic to you as far as the future growth, or are we having those numbers updated?
So we will be doing modeling and projections for future growth in the corridor based on land use plans that exist on both sides of the river. We know that the standard metropolitan statistical area has a growth projection going out for a number of years. So we will be looking at things like that to help drive what our future projections for traffic growth in this corridor will be. But once again, the DOTs are getting out of the business of building their way out of congestion. What they're trying to do and what we're trying to do here is build a smarter roadway that's adaptable to conditions to move traffic in a consistent manner. So your daily trip will be something that you can count on with some consistency and some reliability. And you won't have well, if I start 5 minutes later, it may take me an hour longer to get to where I'm going. So those are the things that the DOTs and the progressive and the smart DOTs are looking at, is managing the space that they have better. And that's what we're going to be looking at here, is making sure we manage the space that we have better.
Thank you. And I do want to encourage, if you're one of our committee members that hasn't made a question or comment, now would be a great time, because we've got Greg captive. We've got just a couple minutes before we want to open it up for public comment. But does anyone else have a question or a comment or feedback for Greg? Sarah, and then Dina. Thank you, Dina.
Hi, Greg. So you just mentioned that we are going to focus on managing our existing spaces better, which is great. Does that mean that we are not going to be increasing the existing footprint size of the project, or have we not made that decision yet?
So that decision hasn't been made yet, but we know one of the things that causes the backups and the safety issues in the corridor is that you have 7 interchanges in a 5-mile space. And if you've ever gone north and tried to go to SR14 or to downtown Vancouver, you know you have about 500 feet to make a decision. And once again, the friction that causes for the through traffic of people making that decision point is one of the things that causes the backups and the safety. And you multiply that by the other interchanges and other decisions that people have to make relatively quickly to get to where they're going. So we know that one of the ways to solve that is to have auxiliary lanes that take those merge and weave movements out of the flow of through traffic. So that's one of the things that we're looking at and that we will model. We'll model 0 auxiliary lanes, but we don't think that that's going to help solve the problem. So we know that safety shoulders don't exist on the existing bridge. And we know that when somebody breaks down on that segment of freeway, that there's a lane of traffic that's automatically gone. And so having safety shoulders where people can safely move their vehicle off to the shoulder rather than blocking a lane, that's going to be a tremendous help. But once again, that does take space to create those safety shoulders. So there's a lot of things that we're going to model and look at and make sure we are doing the smart thing and utilizing space as best we can.
Great, thank you.
Dina?
And mostly just some comments in terms of, if you're anybody who has to build something on, over, or near water, there is, a pretty extensive set of federal and state laws that you have to, and a lot of times local ordinances that you have to comply with as well. And so there's, a lot of consideration, made for salmon and other species and air quality and water quality, between the National Environmental Policy Act, State Environmental Policy Act, Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, shoreline permits, whole 9 yards. There will be, from what I understand for this process moving forward, as Greg pointed out, this is going to be an exceedingly scrutinized project. So please know that, we fully support looking at all of the environmental potential impacts And as part of that process, when you're designing the project to start with, you are required to design your project in a way to avoid impacts, minimize impacts, and then mitigate for what you can't avoid or minimize. So there is a lot of work that is done on the front end and then through the environmental permitting process to ensure that we are being responsible stewards of the environment and natural resources. And we welcome the opportunity to do anything we can to help make this an amazing project that works for everybody and the environment. So thank you.
Dina, I couldn't have said that better myself. Thank you. This will be a model project. Once again, the Columbia is one of the most iconic rivers in the country, and we will treat it with the respect that it is due. We will not have a contractor doing stupid things. So we will protect this this wonderful resource that we have.
Okay, Sherry, and then I will just let people know that we do need to honor our commitment to public comment. So we're gonna have to bring it home here pretty quickly. But Sherry, you haven't had a chance to speak yet, if you would.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll keep this really short and really brief. Just my thoughts in terms of the entire conversation today, this entire meeting about managing demand and seemingly creating all kinds of alternatives for commuters that I think is potentially offering hope that we can have a smaller footprint for the bridge. I just want, as a reminder, an industry representative that trucks and freight don't have alternatives, and any alternative that might be considered is really an increase in traffic on the bridge if we are to have fewer trucks, or excuse me, smaller trucks that are less productive. So just a reminder, I mean, part of our biggest concern with this I-5 bridge is really the congestion and the time that our drivers do spend in traffic on the bridge. It adds to costs. It does impact consumers. Eventually those products come to your store shelves and price of congestion is built in. So just as a reminder, that's it.
Sherry, thank you. And thank you, everyone. Great engagement. I'm sorry that there are time limits, but what we'll do is move to public comment. We don't know how many public commenters we have. So if we do have just a few minutes left, we can open it back up for questions and still end on time. But at this point, let's go ahead and move to public comment. Lisa, I think you're gonna kind of help us out with that.
What a great meeting. Lots of dialogue, and appreciated seeing some new voices share their thoughts and opinions. We are at that point in the meeting where we do really encourage the public to provide feedback. And the last that I heard, we did not have anyone sign up, but Brent, I want to double check with you if that's still the case.
As of right now, we still do not have anyone for public comment.
Okay, maybe we should go and throw the slides up just real quick, just to make sure that if anyone is watching on YouTube and they're interested in providing public comment, they are reminded how best to do that. And then I can go back through some of our what's next slides that we had, just so that the community advisory group knows what to expect and what's upcoming in the next month. So if you could go to the next slide, Jason. Just again, I want to reiterate, to make a verbal comment, please call dialing 1-669-900-6833. Meeting ID is 993-5459-6043, passcode 674942, and dial *9 to raise your hand. I'll call on participants to provide comment, and then dial *6 to unmute yourself. We're looking for your name and affiliation, and we want to allow the public time to be able to provide feedback to our community advisory group and to the program. Next slide.
Just another reminder to the public, we are interested in hearing your feedback and in ensuring that our community advisory group has copies of any feedback that you send. So please email info@interstatebridge.org and make sure to include in the subject line CAG Public Comment. As a reminder, we do send the community advisory group any emails that come in through this info box. We also, as a program team, follow up with any public commenters or anyone that has questions that addresses the program through our info box. So this is an important part of ensuring that commitment to two-way dialogue. Brent, anyone that has called in?
No one as of yet. So if someone does,
Okay.
I will let you know.
Okay, thanks so much, Brent. Jason, do you want to go back through some of our what's next slides, and we'll just do this real quick, and then I'll pass it back over to you, Lynn, in case there's any other comments. We do have our equity advisory group that meets August 16th from 5:30 to 7:30. We really encourage you to tune in, or if you miss that time, you can always check out our YouTube channel and watch it later. We do not have an executive steering group meeting this month, but we do have one September 15th from 11 to 1 p.m. There's also a mention of our bi-state legislative committee is now wanting and ready to meet with the program on a monthly basis. And that meeting is set in September as well. So when we have more information, we will send that out to the community advisory group so that you have the opportunity to take a look at that meeting as well. There's a lot that is happening relative to community engagement. We are hoping that you can help encourage members of our community to participate in our Elevating Equity listening sessions. These sessions are led by Salome. We had one last night. It was people with disabilities. It was a great session. We heard some really good feedback. We also heard some feedback before the session from those that weren't able to attend but wanted to provide comments. We have various other listening sessions where we really are trying to reach out to specific communities of concern. So any help you can provide, we'd appreciate it. Next slide. We are launching a mini grant program, and the eligibility for this program is to serve or represent communities of concern, reflective of the IBR adopted definition of equity, has an office physically located in or members within the larger program area or region, organizations that have multiple modes of engagement, and that are a legally incorporated nonprofit organization. We're really excited about this program. We need your help. We need to be able to ensure that we're reaching voices that are part of our communities of concern, and we are meeting our community where they are. And so we recognize that our networks are only so wide, and despite our efforts to try and ensure that we reach communities in lots of different ways, we still need your help. So these mini grants are being offered for organizations, and the applications are open until August 13th. You can find out all of those details on the website. So I would encourage you to take a look. It looks like we have a public commenter. Brent, just want to confirm that's the case.
Yes, we do. And last digits of 8615, and you'll be prompted to unmute, and it is *6 to unmute.
Thank you, Brent. Just a reminder, we'd like for you to please address the group with your name and any affiliation. And I will nudge you at 2 minutes to wrap up. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Would love to hear your feedback.
Am I on?
You are. Welcome.
My name is Marion Reese, RHYS, and I'm with the organization AORTA, the Association of Oregon Rail and Transit Advocates. And I just wanted to respond to Greg Johnson's comments about the common sense. I'm not sure if he's referring to version 1 or version 2, because the version 2 of Common Sense Alternative that does include a new freeway bridge. It's not as high, it's not as wide as the one that was proposed by ODOT in 2012, but it definitely is a new freeway bridge, and on the I-5 corridor. So I just wanted to correct that perception. I don't know if Greg Johnson has, or anybody has seen that version, which is available on YouTube, by the way. So that's all my. Oh, I also wanted to say about the railroad bridge. Of course, we're well aware that the railroad bridge is owned by the railroad. Pretty much all railroad is owned by railroads, but have to work with the railroads to do that, and there's no reason to think that they would not be open to negotiating about that. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you for calling in. We appreciate your feedback. And if you have any additional public comments, please feel free to reach out to the program via the info box or give us a call. Jason, I think we might have had maybe one or two more slides. Just want to kind of follow back up, and then Brent, again, if anyone else joins in, please let me know. I think I kind of mentioned where we were at with the mini grants. So looking for community-based organizations, check out the website. We're happy to send you a link for that application. August 13th is the date. We've talked about community working groups in the last couple meetings. Just briefly, we have sent out a call to action asking for members of the community advisory group to participate in these 4 working groups. We just wanted to provide a little bit more information because we hope by the time we meet again in September that we will have all 4 of those working groups stood up and ready to start meeting. So again, those working groups are active transportation, downtown Vancouver, Hayden Island and Marine Drive, and a multimodal commuter working groups. The groups are going to range from 18 to 25. We are looking for members of the community and organizations that can represent stakeholder interests. Next slide. I think I covered that. Organizational appointments. So we are looking for those CBOs and stakeholder interest groups. And we did leverage the community advisory group applications. So you may recall that we had almost 500 applications for the at-large position. So we've been able to go back through those applications. And when we did open that, we asked if you might be interested in participating in a community working group. If you were not selected for the community advisory group, we're pretty excited that there were several that were still interested. And we have, over the last 2 months, interviewed over 60 community members. So just a tremendous amount of work. Again, we're doing some targeted outreach. We are ensuring that we're centering equity in the selection of our community working groups. And I just want to, shout out to our community advisory group members that have said yes to participate and give us a little bit more of their time. Thank you, Victor, Michaela, Ashton, Jasmine, Michelle, Robin, and Tom Hickey. So those are the community advisory group members that will be participating on those community working groups, and just want to continue to find ways to link both the key working groups and our community advisory group so that all of our community facing interaction is coordinated. So with that, I think those were my quick updates about what was happening with the program and what's upcoming next. I think I pass it on to Mr. Washington to wrap us up.
Hey, well, I will, but it's probably going to take me about an hour. No, I didn't hear anybody say that would be great. I just want to thank all of the committee members, all the advisory group members who contributed to the meeting today, and appreciate so very much your input, your thoughts. They were excellent. They were well thought out and very, very professional. So thank you so very, very much. And I hope that you all will continue to do that, because that is your job. Being on the committee is to serve and to put forth ideas and help us come to a conclusion on this. And I'd like to thank staff members, Sarah, Lisa, Alex, Lynn, for your excellent work today. And a special shout out to Sam Kim. Sam, your video was excellent. And I know you're on your way to Hollywood, so just don't forget to give us all autographed pictures when you get there. So having said that, hope you all have a wonderful rest of the evening. Next meeting will be September 2nd, 4 o'clock. Look forward to seeing you all. And also Greg, thank you, Greg. I forgot your name. Thank you so very, very much, Greg, for bringing all the information that you did about the project. So you all have a wonderful evening. Stay cool. Keep on keeping on until September. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.